I want to introduce the opening keynote speaker. It's Dr. Simon Kost, who's joined Microsoft in 2010. Now, Microsoft hires a lot of people with expertise, probably, but you don't think about Microsoft hiring medical doctors. But in the medical space for Microsoft, it's an important area, particularly with a lot of the work in health IT and the work that goes on there. When I was CTO at HP, we did a lot of work with Microsoft on things like accessibility technologies, and it's amazing the capabilities that Microsoft has in the healthcare space, but many of us don't even think about that. Simon joined Microsoft in 2010, and he's part of the Microsoft Worldwide Health team, where he's responsible for the clinical strategy and the overall engagement from Microsoft with the healthcare space. Simon has a pretty extensive background in the health IT world, which is an important topic to kind of kick us off today from those conversations. So I'm going to get off the stage. Simon, it's all yours.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone. All right, that's an Australian accent for those of you who are trying to pick me. I just want to reinforce something that Phil said. I'm thrilled to be here because I believe the cable industry has so much to offer healthcare at the moment. And I'm not just talking about the infrastructure, that's essential to go where we need to go. But over dinner with Ralph, the CTO, last night, we talked about how the cable industry once upon a time was like the Balkan states. It was feudal, proprietary companies locking in technology, creating silos, fragmenting the experience for consumers. That's where we are in healthcare IT today. It's a bit of a fragmented mess, and moving through that to an industry where we share information and support that patient continuum is really, really important. So you have a lot of experience to bring to bear helping us through that process. Good. So just a little bit about me. I'm a medical doctor by background. Practicing medicine under the current regime, you kind of have to suck up that it's an imperfect system. And most clinicians accept that, work with it. Some of us are a little frustrated. The system will probably result in patient harm over the course of your practicing career. And critical care was my background. I had to face the fact when I was a junior doctor that I probably would kill patients as a result of not having the right information at hand to make my care decisions. And that didn't sit well with my conscience. So I've now spent 15 years in healthcare IT. Initially, I worked for electronic medical record vendors. I believed that those systems of record were the silver bullet that would change everything. I'm a little older and wiser these days. I think we need a portfolio approach to truly transform healthcare. So I've got a presentation in 4 parts. The first part will just have a bit of a discussion about change in society in general. Secondly, we'll move on to a model of digital transformation for healthcare, and I'll unpack that in the third session, which will be video heavy, but I'll bring you examples that I think exemplify some of the trends that we're seeing, and that'll set us up for where are we going. That'll be the closing component. Where will technology take the health industry? What will it mean for us? So I've got 60 minutes, and I'll try and move through relatively quickly so that I've got time for Q&A. So do use your app. I think you'll find that the presentation material will be provocative, so put those questions into the app, and then we'll talk about them at the end. Starting with a quick quote, I love this one, that it will ever come into general use, notwithstanding its value, I'm extremely doubtful, because its beneficial application requires much time, gives a good deal of trouble both to the patient and the practitioner, and because its whole hue and character is foreign and opposed to all our habits and associations. Does anyone know what John Forbes was talking about in 1821? The stethoscope? Yeah, the stethoscope. I love this example where an initial piece of technology was greeted with skepticism by the industry, and now it is a quintessential symbol of providing care. And it's not just the 1800s that have a monopoly on limited vision. Have a look at Ken Olsen's statement from 1977 about the fact that there's no need for an individual to have a computer in their home. But think about where we are today. Microsoft has a new CEO, Satya Nadella, and when he came on board 3 years ago, he said, I see a future of ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence. Ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence, what does that mean? It doesn't mean a desktop computer everywhere you turn around. It means that the technology starts to become transparent in the background. And it's not just passive. There's intelligence sitting there that surfaces up that data that is gathered in ways that are useful to us. Really, really exciting. But to do that, we need to rethink the model. So we need to move from this whole mechanical idea of we interface with computing through mouse and keyboard and some of the limited ways that we have, and then we get outputs through audio and video. We need to move to a more human interaction. And this is really exciting. This is where we're spending a lot of our time reimagining what more personal computing looks like. So I want to show you a quick little video because this sensory view applies to all of us, but it has enormous potential, as Phil mentioned, for the accessibility for people who don't necessarily have all of their senses and capabilities. So I'll show you a little example from the UK, and then we'll move into how this lands in healthcare.
I'm Sakim Sheikh. I lost my sight when I was 7, and shortly after that I went to a school for the blind. And that's where it was introduced to talking computers, and that really opened up a whole new world of opportunities. I joined Microsoft 10 years ago as a software engineer. I love making things which improve people's lives. And one of the things I've always dreamt of since I was at university was this idea of something that could tell you at any moment what's going on around you.
I think it's a man jumping in the air doing a trick on a skateboard.
I teamed up with like-minded engineers to make an app which lets you know who and what is around you. It's based on top of the Microsoft Intelligence APIs, which makes it so much easier to make this kind of thing. The app runs on smartphones, but also on the Pivot Head smart glasses. When you're talking to a bigger group, sometimes you can talk and there's no response, and you think, is everyone listening really well, or are they half asleep? And you never know.
I see two faces, 40-year-old man with a beard looking surprised, 20-year-old woman looking happy.
The app can describe the general age and gender of the people around me and what their emotions are, which is incredible. One of the things that's most useful about the app is the ability to read out text.
Hello, good afternoon. Here's your menu.
Great, thank you. I can use the app on my phone to take a picture of the menu, and it's going to guide me on how to take that correct photo.
Move camera to the bottom right and away from the document.
And then it'll recognize the text. Read me the headings.
I see appetizers, salads, paninis, pizzas, pastas.
Years ago, this was science fiction. I never thought it would be something that you could actually do. But artificial intelligence is improving at an ever faster rate. And I'm really excited to see where we can take this. As engineers, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants, building on top of what went before. And in this case, we've taken years of research from Microsoft Research to pull this off.
I think it's a young girl throwing an orange frisbee in the park.
For me, it's about taking that far-off dream and building it one step at a time. I think this is just the beginning.
So that's where we're going as society, which is really exciting to me. But where are we from a digital maturity in the healthcare system? This is Donald Berwick, and he talks about the Triple Aim. So that was a framework that was published in 2008, and it talks about a health system that needs to adapt. Once upon a time, it was appropriate when we were all living relatively short lives and our interaction with the medical system was to treat short, self-limiting diseases that needed an acute setting. You'd go to hospital, that was okay. Today we've got an ageing population, and the burden really is how do we manage chronic disease that is lifestyle induced? And going to a hospital system is not the way to do that. This is the Triple Aim, and it's how do we need to modernise what we do. Talks about 3 areas. First is the patient experience, and some people simplify that to quality. It's the subjective experience of the patient. How did that feel? Was I happy with the service that's provided? And the objective experience. What are our rates of medical error? What are our complication rates? How effective are we in providing that therapy? Access, manage the wellness of populations, and then do it in a way that's cost effective and sustainable by lowering the per capita cost of care. The Triple Aim, despite calling out those areas, doesn't really paint you a roadmap for how you get there. And more recently, there's been a paper published by Bodenheimer and Sinski in 2014 that talks about the Quadruple Aim. Essentially, it says that the care of the patient requires care of the provider, and that's where we need to start. We need to empower our care teams to do the very best that they can. And in fact, that's the model that we'll talk through. How do we empower care teams, engage patients, manage population wellness by leveraging analytics, and then look at new models of care that transform the continuum? Let me unpack that for you a little bit, because this is a model that we'll use to go through our examples. So I mentioned that I have a background with electronic medical records, and in fact there's been an arms race in the health industry, especially in the US, as a result of the meaningful use stimulus funding that Obama put in as part of the GFC rescue, that has resulted in enormous expenditure and high saturation of these systems, these electronic medical records. They create a digital asset, but unlocking that digital asset requires more than the electronic medical record. That's data that we can unlock through analytics and systems of insight. And then there are human processes where people need to communicate, collaborate, learn and team. And healthcare is quite immature in both of those systems. We really need to rebalance that portfolio if we're to make use of that digital information. If we do that, as a digital organisation, we can reach beyond the 4 walls of the acute health system. We can start to stretch out and engage. And we can engage our commercial partners. They might be health plan organisations or the government, or team up with research and academic organisations, or in fact go B2C and start to reach out directly to consumers digitally. And that creates a real continuum of information. Information that we can structure, store, analyse, and then draw down on to formulate insights. With that digital information, but also with new sources of information. So we can mash up open data sets like socio-demographic data and weather data and all of that sort of stuff to get a greater insight, and then add in the new sources of information, genomics and so forth, to really get a digital understanding. Once we've got that, we have the potential to think about how do we deliver those healthcare services quite differently. And that's digital transformation. I'm going to show you some examples from locally and abroad about digital transformation in action. Because William Ford Gibson said, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And in fact, that's what we see. Healthcare is kind of like 1,000 flowers blooming out there. Some of them are great ideas. It's a question of how do we scale them and mature them. So the first one I wanted to show you is an example of telemedicine. And telehealth, telemedicine is not new. We've been doing this since the 50s, but there has been a pivot recently that changes how this technology might be democratised and scale. Let me show you the video and I'll talk you through my experience using this technology.
Brighton and Sussex University NHS Trust. They're using Skype for Business to reduce the time taken to diagnose stroke patients.
Out of hours, the stroke consultant won't always be on site. and they used to have to come into the hospital to assess patients, which loses a lot of time. With the new Microsoft system, we can be contacted at home, assess the patient very quickly. The difference assessing a patient was amazing the first time we used it. The quality of the pictures is so good, and this means that the patient is likely to do better than we may have expected before, because we know that if you treat people quicker, less brain cells are affected, and so you're likely to be left with less disability.
It's staggering, the difference in cost between this off-the-shelf product and a more commercial, standardised telemedicine offering. That's really important for me because it enables us to take all the benefits and deliver them to areas around the trust that probably wouldn't normally be at the top of the list for telemedicine.
So Telehealth 1.0 is what I used when I was practicing. And it was a room that you'd go to, away from the clinical wards. You had a very rigid session time, and you need IT to hold your hand to initiate a call, and it was quite artificial. It didn't work for my workflow. Telehealth 2.0 is how do we make use of more commercially available video conferencing technology and then embed it contextually into the systems that we're using so that providers don't need IT, that they can do it ad hoc. You can start to light up telehealth, telemedicine scenarios in the context of your workflow. I worked with a group in Australia and I got an insight into how we manage stroke, and it was a little confronting to realise how poorly we do. So once upon a time, we couldn't do much for stroke. You would come into hospital, we didn't have the imaging technology, so we'd treat you as best you could, and it was mostly about rehabilitation and management of the deficit that happens when brain cells die. Then we got CTs and MRIs, and we could figure out which stroke was a bleed versus a clot, and that changes your management, because now we have clot-busting drugs. We have medications like TPA, where if you give it to someone within the critical time window of 4 hours, you can go through, you can dissolve that clot, you can reduce the deficit that people having a stroke will have, or eliminate it completely. But 4 hours, that challenges the supply chain of how we traditionally deal with stroke. You think about it, you're having a stroke, you call 911 or your emergency service, whatever that might be, and the traditional way it works is that patient gets transferred to emergency, assessed by a doctor, sent up to the medical imaging department, have the scan, call in a neurologist, authorise the medication, all within 4 hours. It just wasn't happening. So in my hometown, I worked with a service and they looked at their rates of providing this medication. This is a medication that could entirely remove your symptoms or change your deficit. Guess what the percentage of people who were able to receive that medication? 2%. 2% is what they were doing for the population. So they use this. So the FAST assessment says, at the scene, have a look at the patient and just see, in their face, do they have any deficit? Is there a facial droop or something like that? Get them to move their arms, assess their strength. Have a listen to their speech, are they slurring? Check the time. If they are, instead of going to emergency, at the scene, you initiate a telehealth session where you consult with a neurologist, show them the patient, get the authorisation to bypass emergency, straight to the nearest scanner, and when you get your results, the neurologist can authorise that medication, which is exciting because for this service, it raised their administration from 2% to 14%, and the cost savings in doing so was staggering. The average stroke costs the health system 300,000 Australian dollars for that in the first year alone of direct cost. And then there's all the ongoing care. If they were able to change the administration from 2% to 14%, extraordinary savings both for the health system and the patients. So telehealth, it's out there at the moment, but this is telehealth probably as you haven't seen it. We've made Skype available as an API to embed directly into systems, and we're working through our partners to make sure that scales out around the world. All right, patient engagement. The example I've got here, I put in last night as a result of the discussions that we had over dinner. This is patient infotainment. Once upon a time, as a patient, you'd go into hospital and your experience there is probably a disempowered experience where you don't quite know what's going on, you don't have the information at hand, and there's this real asymmetry. The medical profession has all of that information, you don't, and the whole concept of patient infotainment is trying to bridge that gap with technology. So we take the traditional socket where patients would be receiving their video, their entertainment, grabbing their internet services and communicating out via email and maybe video conferencing to their loved ones, and use that to start to bring in medical content as well. I'll show you an example from UCSF, and then I'll show you how it changed outcomes for one hospital.
11-year-old Kellen Durham is one of the first arrivals on the junior ward. At his disposal, a touchscreen tablet, and a massive 60-inch monitor to complement it. There's a plethora, almost bewildering amount of information to plough through. What's the most interesting bit for you?
Well, there's different movies that you can watch that are set up, and they have games that you can play on a tablet.
But there is a more serious component to this too, empowering and engaging both patients and their families, who can log in remotely to see updates on their progress. Patients themselves can record their pain and even find out more about their condition through educational videos.
Inside your body is an organ called the pancreas.
It can empower patients with information about who's on their treatment team, how to ask questions of their treatment team. They also can access information about their care. They can access their patient portal, their lab data, as well as their radiology, their x-rays, their CT scans, their MRIs.
So we're seeing a lot of this going across the US, mostly in response to CMS and increasing hospital satisfaction scores, capturing those, and this is a way to actually capture that survey information. But what it means for this provider, OneView, they've been able to start to capture the care continuum. So if this is a system that you're going to use in hospital, pre-operatively or before you come in for an elective admission, you can start to load up your profile, check that your demographics are okay, and then after you go home, it can be used for follow-up. So they're really using it to drive that continuum of care. I attended a conference last year. This is Damien Claydon-Platt. He's the CMIO at Epworth Health in Melbourne, and you'd expect the top line, which is some subjective improvements in putting in this system. They've had it there for more than 10 years. So better patient satisfaction, more provider time at the bedside, and more efficient ward rounds. But have a look at some of the other clinical indicators that they drove by putting in this system. It's not just a warm and friendly approach to make patients happy. They decreased their falls, they decreased their pressure injuries, and through better communication managed to get a tighter rein on the pain mix for the patients who are requiring opiate medication after surgery. And all of that translated to a decreased length of stay for this organisation. So real metrics that make a difference for hospitals. So that's patient engagement. Let's talk about analytics. The analytics component of this might not be evident from the video, but I'll tease it out as we discuss it afterwards.
Thinking everything's fine and it's not, that's scary. Reading is my escape. I have hearing problems, and I've had problems since I was like 4 years old. I'm extremely shy. My husband and my son, they're my life. I've lived with the thought that I could lose my hearing, but the thought of losing my eyesight is just, it's unimaginable.
Diabetes is the leading cause of blindness in the United States.
I went to my doctor and we're talking about my diabetes, talking about my medications, and as I walked out, the nurse came up to me and said, "Okay, we're going to do an iris exam." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
just like a vital sign. Let's take pictures of the back of your eye. They are exported straight up to the Microsoft cloud, and in Azure, our systems are running and eye care providers are interpreting those. Within minutes, we have a preliminary report.
So instead of saying, hey, in a couple years you'll go blind unless you make a change, we can say, hey, we can stop this now and we can make a difference.
In the first 6 months, we found 24 people that were very close to sight-threatening disease.
You stop to think, what am I not going to see? What am I going to miss? I can no longer see my son's face. I can no longer drive. That's taking away my freedom. It was a shock to find out that there was something.
We have the opportunity to do one more test, and that test finds that this person has sight-threatening disease they have no idea they had. To me, that's why we're doing what we're doing.
As a physician, before we had this available to us, you kind of just almost give up because you go through the motions of saying, please go get this done.
You would have to go see a specialty provider, a specialty copay. You have to get dilated within the office. It's often a 2 to 3 hour process. There are thousands of stories of people who did not have access to early detection.
It was 5 minutes over and done with, but the knowledge that I have, I know there's something.
And we have the ability to do this now with these people. I mean, you forever change someone's life.
I have control here. I can decide how much more damage is going to be done to my eyes by just taking better care of myself. Just, taking it one step at a time. You just never know what you're going to see. It's beautiful.
That is the only video that's not available publicly, and I hope we'll be able to make that available soon, because there's quite a few things to tease out in that video. So getting a slit lamp exam, that's essentially what's happening here. Traditionally, you'd get referred to an ophthalmologist, and the ophthalmologist has a waiting period, and the exam to actually have it is quite an impost on the patient. It's a 2 to 3 hour procedure, as you heard, drops to dilate the eye, you can't drive after that, it's expensive. All of that translates to poor compliance. And when Cox Health had a look across their population, compliance with getting their retinal screening for diabetics was at best 50%, at worst 32%. And they put this in. So it's a hardware-software device. It can sit in the primary care clinic setting, so it doesn't require the referral to the ophthalmologist. It's self-guided. Uses some smart technology to position your head, move your chin forward, straighten up, that sort of stuff, open your eyes. And it doesn't require dilating drops. And then the reading happens by professionals who are getting these results coming back in. The analytics component of it is the algorithms that are running up in the cloud. So this is just a big data problem. It's an image recognition issue, and you can write algorithms to start to screen for some of the more common things. And what that means is the abnormals can go straight through to physicians who are then able to report on them in a timely manner, and they can go back in minutes or hours rather than days and weeks. So that really closes the latency, and you can see where it's going. Automated image recognition. Once upon a time, when you took EKGs, they would come out without interpretations. Now, any EKG that you take spits out an automated interpretation. That's machine intelligence figuring it out, and it's as good as cardiologists. Cardiologists always want to check it, but it hasn't put cardiologists out of a job. Work styles need to change as we introduce automation. It's interesting to think where this will go. All right, so the last one, as we complete the 4 pillars of that continuum. This comes from Mercy Children's in Kansas City, and it's a story that we've been very close to, the family and also the care providers, and it's the remote monitoring. I'll build on that Phil talked us through.
I think in the back of each of our minds, we were planning a little funeral. And just didn't know where it would go after he was born. Winston was diagnosed with HLHS, which is hypoplastic left heart syndrome.
1 in 100 to about 125 babies are born with heart disease every year, and out of those, about 1% are born with half a heart. Out of all the heart surgery we do, this is the most high risk.
They lose about 25% of these babies in between the two surgeries.
The standard of care at the time was to send these families home with a weighing scale and a pulse oximeter and a 3-ring binder, and they were asked to record measurements of their baby every day.
There would have been a lot to juggle and learn on our end, just as new parents. And then we added all these things in that really increases the stress level.
So we needed a method that we could actually send something home with the parents so that we could better monitor and be alerted if there were conditions that we were concerned about with the patient. We have a Microsoft Surface that we load our software on. We call it CHAMP. We decided we wanted to use a modern app with Windows 10 as the operating system.
We would log all of his vitals, and that app became this seamless piece to his care.
With the daily reports that come in from the Azure cloud, if anything is an outlier that needs to be notified to us immediately, it'll alert us.
The tablet already has a camera, and we said, why not get video every day in addition to all the other measurements? Just see what that does.
One of the things that saved Winston's life was the 15-second video.
When we were looking at his information, he had a couple days of not gaining weight. He was breathing a little bit harder, and he just wasn't happy on his video.
They could pull it from when he was doing fine and saying, okay, a couple weeks ago, this is what he looked like. Now he looks like this. We think it is part of his aorta.
They did the procedure the next day, and then I think he went home the day after.
There's still that underlying piece on the back of your mind you're going, this is major heart surgery.
I mean, it's a scary thing to think of what could have happened.
This technology literally saved his life.
The first time that I heard a child's life had been saved with CHAMP, I left the room because I kind of needed to tear up in private because it was a dream that I'd had for a long, long time.
We've learned so much, and it's changed our practice and made us more efficient, but also saved lives, that we want to roll out nationally to other children's hospitals that do cardiac surgery.
For everyone behind the scenes, we're very thankful for it. Saved his life, and how do you say thank you for that?
So that's a pretty extraordinary story. The condition Winston has is hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Pretty rare, but the scenario I think is extensible. Those kids have 3 procedures. They require surgery within the first 6 days after being born, generally a revision at 6 months, and then between 18 months and 3 years they have their final Norwood reversion, and that's how you treat those kiddos. Winston was the first graduate of the program, so he's now 3.5. He's healthy, he's happy, he's thriving. And in the 3.5 years to March, Children's Mercy hasn't lost a single kid. Now, this is a condition that has a 25% mortality. That's the expected best practice, the gold standard across the world. And it's because when they send these kids home, the changes that the parents are asked to look for are really quite subtle. They're colour and hue differences, changes in their breathing patterns, really non-specific things, and they have managed to redefine the mortality for this condition. Now, that won't continue forever. They will have their complications. They will lose their children in the future. It's kind of like the airline industry, but they've re-baselined what the quality is. And because they've done it on a cloud-based application, they can now scale this. So they've rolled it out to 3 other hospitals so far. They're in the process of unfolding across 9 states at the moment, and they have the potential to totally redefine the condition. Now, how did they do it? This is a hospital that has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in their electronic medical record, and this sideline project took them weeks, and they use consumer-grade tablets. Out they go, and instead of doing the manual data collection, they've decreased the latency time and increased the communication with the care team. And then they've added in something new. It was easy to capture that video data, so they've got it. The care team can actually see what's going on, and now they have over 3 years of video analytic data that they want to start to run through machine learning systems to be able to see, okay, now we've got the clinical outcomes. How does that correlate with what we're seeing in the video? How can we use that predictively? This is really exciting stuff. And you can see the role of connectivity, data out to the home, and how it changes that model of care. That's what we mean when we talk about transforming the continuum. How might we deliver services quite differently to achieve different outcomes? All right, so those were the 4 pillars of digital transformation. And at Microsoft, I'm lucky to work with this enormous ecosystem of partners. So Microsoft does business directly sometimes, but most of our effect happens through this federated ecosystem of partners working on Microsoft technology, creating solutions, and then taking them out to market. So our partner ecosystem at last count had about 437,000 partners across the world. We estimate there's about 30,000 active in the health and human services market. And what that means is there's this enormous diversity that creates competition and choice and capability to go do things. So those are some of the examples that I've harvested, but there's examples in each pillar of digital transformation in action around the world. Really exciting time for health as we struggle to adapt the health system to make it the more responsive and sustainable system that we need it to be. Here's where it's going. Microsoft invests across 3 pillars. That's how we report to Wall Street. Building the intelligent cloud, which is an infrastructure component, making computing more personal, and then reinventing business productivity and processes. These are the areas that we're working on. In the intelligent cloud space, yes, it's about building a worldwide network of data centers, but doing that to achieve an endpoint so that we can start to accelerate artificial intelligence, provide a platform that makes genomic analysis and interpretation more cost effective, and then the next iteration, which will be quantum computing. Really exciting stuff. On the more personal computing side of it, I'll show you an example of mixed reality, because this is fun and this is unfolding in different and unexpected ways. It's a delight to see how mixed reality is landing in healthcare at the moment. Personal health insights, how might we be able to use apps and intelligence to surface information back to patients in actionable ways? And then conversational computing, what's the role of chatbots so that we can actually engage, self-diagnose, hand off to an appropriate care provider with all of the history taken, and then help navigate a really complex health system or our health plans. And then reinventing business productivity and processes. We talked about telehealth, telemedicine. That's just a component of the much larger virtual care scenario. Precision medicine is how we take genomic information, marry it up with the phenotypic data that's sitting in your electronic medical record or other investigative sources out there, and start to tailor plans for me. Not just patients like me, but me. And then manage chronic disease. So that's where we're going, and that's how we're investing. Let me show you a final example, and then we'll segue into a discussion about trust that will hopefully set us up for the CISO panel later. All right, so I'm going to show you a little bit about our research approach. There's a device that comes out at the end of this, and some of you will already know what it is, but it had a 15-year journey. It wasn't an overnight success. Let me take you through some of the research that culminated across 3 strands to turn into a device that could be productized and commercialized, taken to market. So on the perception side of it, this is a cocktail problem. The initial research was done back in 2000. So the cocktail problem, or the cocktail party problem, is how can you determine from a really noisy room how the conversation of any one person. It's really difficult for machines to be able to do that. But as humans, we're pretty ingenious. We've figured out how to do it. It's a noisy room. Everyone's talking at once. There's lots of background noise. You'll do it unconsciously. You'll tilt your head slightly when someone's talking at you. And what you're doing is creating a parallax between the time that the sound waves hit one ear and hit the other ear. And you can use that to zone in on what's being said. And then you can filter out the background noise. You can have a conversation. Pretty neat trick that we as humans do unconsciously. It has some implications for how we do this with machine intelligence. Cognition. This is Eric Horvitz. He's one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, and this was some of his initial work on continual computation that then turned into layered networks and deep neural nets. So this is the basis of how we figure out how to do categorization through machine learning. Down here are advances in visual processing. So this is some of the early shader work that was done in how do we create 3D models. Here's the answer to the cocktail problem. It's probably not something you'd want to wear to a cocktail party, but it's a little device that actually has two different microphones, creating that parallax overlap that allows a machine to be able to zone in on individual conversations in a noisy room. As we started to move into artificial reality, it's interesting to think about the human response to that technology. How do people interact? And this experiment, they're actually throwing virtual objects to people and seeing how they would react. And some people would jump back in fright, some people would try and catch the thing, others would catch it and throw it back. How do we as humans respond to a virtual world? Down to object recognition. So if we've got the deep neural networks, we can start to categorize things. There's an app out there called Fetch, and you can access it through whatdog.ai, and you can actually put in pictures of dogs and it'll figure out which one it is. It's a fun little example of these neural networks. It can take objects, recognize them, categorize them, and once we've got that, be able to do machine interpretation and computation on them. Here's Lucid Touch, another example in graphics processing. It was one of the early examples of augmented reality where we had a digital screen that we would overlay onto the real world and be able to project things in context. Here's the depth camera that we were working on that ultimately became the Microsoft Kinect sensor, which is a gaming device for the Xbox that does skeletal tracking and body movement analysis, and you can actually use that as a form of gesture-based interaction with your computer. It started out really complex with a whole array of projectors and depth cameras and so forth, but then was productized into something relatively neat that you could buy for $149. Down to advances in 3D display, and then finally using that Kinect camera with its depth sensing technology to be able to map a room and understand where objects were volumetrically and be able to categorize exactly what they are. So what's the device? Has anyone figured it out yet? Yeah, it's HoloLens. So here's the device, and for those of you who haven't seen this, this is one of the first forays into mixed reality. So virtual reality's out there, that's an exciting technology and it's got its own use cases. Virtual reality will take you into an entirely simulated world and you can do all sorts of things. There's some research coming out about how that can be quite effective in reducing pain medication and pain scores through distraction therapy. So it's got its applications in healthcare. Many people find that quite disorientating though, and that can be one of the drawbacks. So it means it's not appropriate for everyone. This mixed reality is the idea that you can actually see the real world, and on top of it, you can start to overlay digital imagery. The early stages of it were called augmented reality. So many of you will be familiar with Google Glass, how they were able to start to put out passive data that overlaid the real world. This is actually quite sophisticated. I'm going to show you an example from Case Western University. This is the Cleveland Clinic's medical school, and they've got a big bet. They're changing how they go ahead and deliver medical education with the intention to go cadaverless. They're going to use holograms rather than dead bodies to teach their next generation medical students anatomy.
We've been teaching human anatomy the same way for 100 years. Students get a cadaver, then they look at medical illustrations, and it's completely two-dimensional, and the human body isn't.
Microsoft HoloLens is a holographic computer that you wear. It enables you to bring your digital world into your real world.
At Case Western Reserve University, we are focused on solving problems and creating new knowledge.
My job is to teach, and I really think this could impact almost everything that we teach people. With HoloLens, you can see the muscles on top of the skeleton all at the same time. You can bring them in and out and exactly understand where things sit.
You can take any anatomical part and show any of it. You can move it around, you can make it kind of translucent so you can see through the outside, and that really helped me understand how cardiac anatomy worked. I actually had a moment where I found the aortic valve, and it was the first time that I'd actually seen the aortic valve in relation to all the other anatomical structures. It was a way of seeing it that you couldn't do with an actual heart.
I think this will improve students' confidence in learning anatomy dramatically.
By creating simulations with the HoloLens that lets them have an experience where they can fail, that would be the best way to learn, because we don't allow people to fail too much in real-life medicine.
With HoloLens, you could imagine having a class standing around a model, almost like a tour group in a museum, where they're all interacting completely naturally. I spend a huge amount of time to make sure they become the best professionals, because it's all of our jobs to make the world a better place.
So really exciting stuff. This technology's been out for about 2 years. Initially, we handed it over to developers first to say, what are your ideas? How can this technology be used? Explore use cases. It's now in the phase where it can be purchased by enterprise organisations, and the next stage will be to take it out to consumer land. As I predict this, I don't think Microsoft will long-term be in the game of making these devices. I want to see OEMs jump on board, make smaller, lighter, faster, cheaper versions of this, and really democratise it out there. We're seeing the applications land in technical arenas, so manufacturing especially, and healthcare, and many simulation examples. So we're finding that adoption, ironically, is happening in the emerging world faster than it's happening in the more regulated areas where this kind of technology causes concern. And down in Brazil at the moment, they're using it in reconstructive surgery. They create the models, they're actually wearing it in the operating theatre, and then they can operate, check up against the reference model, and so forth. Over in Norway, they're using it at the University Hospital of Oslo to plan their complex surgeries. So liver resection surgeries for liver cancer, and also pediatric cardiac surgery. And interestingly enough, the pediatric cardiac surgery, they were using 3D printing prior to that. So it's amazing to see how quickly technology moves on and makes other technologies obsolete. All right, so just a quick word on trust before I break and we'll open up for questions. This is Brad Smith, he's Microsoft's president. He's also our chief legal officer. What's Microsoft doing with a lawyer as their president? It's because we've moved beyond what technology can do. It's really about how should we use technology. And that's almost a moral or an ethical question. And certainly at the core of it is is this technology trustworthy? And when we think about trust, it's more than just making sure that data centers are secure. I think it extends out to making sure that you as organisations can ensure that you have the privacy and controls to be able to manage that information, that you know how it's being managed by a cloud provider, be it Microsoft or anyone else, and then meet your specific compliance regimes. And healthcare has some really stringent compliance regimes like HIPAA and HITRUST and FedRAMP in the US and other arrangements across the rest of the world. So we go through and we make sure that we figure out what those compliance certifications are, get them where we can, and then apply that benchmark to all of the data centers and raise the bar of security. We think this is a really important part of generating trust in the cloud. All right, so final slide, just some parting resources. Much of that information is available at Microsoft Health, and there's a website specifically created for health digital transformation where there's an interactive model where you can go explore those 4 pillars and you can start to pull some assets as well. Got 10 minutes for Q&A, so if we could switch over and I'll start taking some of those questions. First one, is the value of Skype to health professionals the codecs or the API or something else? So Skype is the telecommunications platform. It has a consumer version, it has an enterprise grade version, Skype for Business, and the two are federated, so you can talk across the two of them. We're most interested because Skype is simply part of the product portfolio called Office 365, and use of that uses our data centers and our distributed networks to be able to do peer-to-peer and connections between people. So we monetize that directly. When we work with a provider, be it an electronic medical record provider or someone who wants to embed Skype within the application and make it video enabled, there will be a pass-through license in there that the provider may choose to pass directly on or bundle up into the cost of their service. All right, how is Microsoft mitigating more mundane issues with remote healthcare like latency, connection, instability? Is that an issue you run into a lot? That's actually a little technical for me. I could try and answer it, I wouldn't do a good job, sorry. How do you bring together all of the complex systems that you have shown across your examples to enable potential benefits? Yeah, this is a trick. This is a great question for whoever asked it. I mentioned that we are seeing 1,000 flowers blooming at the moment. There's no one single organisation who's got the blueprint on digital transformation. There's lots of innovation out there. The real question is, we know what the broad topics are, be they virtual care or remote monitoring or artificial intelligence or mixed reality, but as they drop down into individual solutions, there's no one manufacturer that's got it solved, or if they do, will be the one going forward. So it's a real question of how does that come together, and interoperability remains a huge concern. One way of achieving interoperability is to make a smart platform choice, and if you're using common technology across different solutions, then you have the potential to integrate, but it's also a matter of working through those organisations, making sure that interoperability is first and foremost. And we see two waves of solution vendors. There are the existing providers, and there's some proprietary lock-in dynamics in that market, and then there are newer born in the cloud solution providers, and many of those are embedding some of the latest interoperability standards. FHIR seems to be the latest at the moment that takes over from the old HL7 messaging, which is a poor medium to exchange information. What role do you see open standards playing in connected health? So standards are really important, be they open or industry standards. What we've found is especially with HL7, which was the messaging information between systems once upon a time, is despite calling it a standard, there are so many versions of it that mean that one provider can say they're HL7 compliant and it can't talk to another system. We've got a lot to do in that regard, and there's a lot of hope for the new standard FHIR, which is an international effort out of CEN, which is the HL7 organisation, as the next iteration to provide the more advanced interoperability that goes beyond text-based information. It's an XML schema, and there's a hope that we can progress the interoperability problems. It's more than just technical though, it's about a mindset shift. And that happened in the cable industry by recognising the need for interoperability, engaging policymakers, and all pulling together in collaboration, and we're yet to achieve that in healthcare. Can you view MRI and CT scans with the 3D glasses? Yeah, so it's simply a projection technology. There's a company I'm working with called Visua, and Visua developed a radiology viewer that was optimised for 3D reconstruction, and it does that with server-side processing so that you can view the reconstructed image on a range of devices that are relatively low-powered, even mobile devices. The fact that they had that capability made transfer out to 3D viewing of any of those scans a real possibility. So they've got kind of 4,000 scans in their archive, and we're putting on an event in May, the CEO Summit, and I'm going to have a bit of a demo of this organisation, because some of the things that I've seen, you model a heart, you can blow it up to the extent that you can start to walk through the coronary arteries and you can see where the plaques are. You can bring it back down. If it's a time series, you can animate it. And unlike what we saw with the HoloLens example there, which was a computer-aided design for teaching medical students, this is the real deal. So I had a look at the heart image, I had a look at a cerebral view of someone who had vascular malformations in their head, and you could actually peer through down into the vascular tree of that person's head, and as you move through the image it starts to plane through the sections. And the final one I had a look at was a full body CT with the arterial tree mapped, and the interesting thing about that is you could plane through soft tissue. So you have a control that says I want to have a look at the skin, cartilage, bone, all of that sort of stuff, and dial through it. Extraordinary way to view the images. Is it practical for diagnostic interpretation? Not sure, that'd be the next step. Certainly an interesting way of looking at, reimagining how we look at these modalities. All right, are there concerns in the medical industry of losing the human touch with the increase of technology use, and how do you balance it? Absolutely, absolutely. So what we had once upon a time was a paper-based workflow where providers would go from room to room to room if you were in a hospital context, and those records might not have been accessible to everyone, but the workflow was pretty efficient. The whole idea of putting electronic systems in was that now we're going to capture that information discreetly so we can do away with the doctor's handwriting problem, and then we can make it accessible to everyone else so we can actually see that information. But it came at a cost. The impost was, in some instances, a 30% increase in the data collection and administrative time required to do that, and it created a barrier between the clinicians and their patients. So I've got some footage that I didn't include that had a doctor talking about how that device got in the way, and he felt it impacted the doctor-patient relationship. So one of the ways to do that is to reimagine how we use these systems. Many of them were created pre-mobility, which means that they're optimised for mouse and keyboard, and they're using them at the point of care is difficult. So how do we change that into a touch-based system that we can use in collaboration with patients? That OneView solution that was a patient infotainment system, we now have the capability to take a mobile device and screen share up to up to the TV that they have in their room, and they can use that to show them their results and medical imaging and so forth. So I think if we flip it from this is my system as a provider to let's collaborate together on the information, it's a dynamic shift, but it's the kind of service level that our patients are starting to expect as we progress through the digital means. All right. Any word of wisdom on cloud personal health record and electronic health record? So I like that vernacular. I'm used to electronic medical records being the deep system of record within a hospital, electronic health records being the summary view that connects them as an interoperability layer, and personal health records as something on the side. This is a service that I, as a consumer, use like my own personal diary. Microsoft started with Health Vault back in, I think it was 2006, and the idea was if we created a service called Health Vault, where people could put their own information, they could collect data from a variety of devices that had drivers to be able to accept it, then we would empower patients and they would self-manage. We found that didn't work. And in fact, as we were doing it, we had a look at Sweden, and they've had it for well over 15 years now, a national EHR. And what they found is that they're at about 30% adoption, and they think that's the cap. They think there's a proportion of the patients who are well and don't want to engage with the health system, or they'd get limited value if they did. There's a proportion of the patients, maybe 10%, who are incapacitated by their disease process where self-managing doesn't make sense. So it's probably that 30% middle where there's chronic disease, where self-management actually translates to better health outcomes. And their median user was a 36-year-old female, and she was using the system not for herself, she was using it to manage kids and her elders. So that needs rethinking. We've gone to a system now, we've re-released it, called Health Vault Insights, and our belief is that information in the personal health record needs to be populated automatically rather than putting an impost onto the patient as much as possible. It needs to span the continuum, not just of the sick care industry, but the well care industry. And then there needs to be a loose coupling with provider systems. So that's the challenge and the future of personal health records. All right, I'm out of time. So thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed sharing with you a little bit about digital transformation, and it's been a delight to answer some of your questions. Thanks for having me. I hope that was provocative.